everyone, welcome to Two Car Pros. My name is Ryan and today we're going to be taking a look at how to replace the driver's side CV axle in a 2014 first generation Chevrolet Volt. Now, if you need to do the passenger side CV axle, it's very similar, except the CV axle is going to be a little bit longer and there might be an additional bracket you have to remove, but it's very similar to the driver's side. I would have done the passenger side as well, but the owner of the car only needed the driver's side done, so that's what got done in the video, but I assure you it is very similar. All that out of the way, let's just go ahead and jump into it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is remove this nut here. In order to keep this whole assembly from turning, what you can do is insert a screwdriver, a decently thick screwdriver into here, and this will stop this whole assembly from turning when you're turning it to the left. Then we can grab our 32mm socket and either a breaker bar, if you don't have air tools, or a 1/2-inch impact gun. Just like that. But I'm going to go ahead and put this back on a few threads so that way I can strike it with a soft mallet later in order to dislodge this. And we can see that it has a little bit of play already, which means it's going to come out, which is nice. So if this was like really tough, so if you don't see any play like this, see I can push this with one finger very easily, that means it's kind of stuck in there and you might want to grab a rubber mallet and smack this surface with the nut on there, you know, just sitting on there finger tight, so, or not even finger tight, just loose. All right, the next thing we need to do is undo this pinch bolt here that holds the spindle to the lower control arm, because we have to bust that ball joint loose, and we're going to back with our 15mm wrench and undo this nut that's also 15mm. Next thing we can do is take a 10mm socket here and remove the vehicle wheel speed sensor. It's not on there. We can remove that up and out of the way, because that would get in the way of our CV axle coming out. We can just kind of set that aside. All right, the next thing we're going to do is remove these, they're like little body clips that hold the wheel speed sensor cable to the lower control arm. And since we're going to be manipulating the lower control arm, if we don't remove these, it'll just rip out, which we don't want, because then you're replacing it. Just like that, and we don't have to remove it off of the spindle here because the lower control arm is independent of it as far as this cable goes. So now we can just bust this lower control arm ball joint. All right, the next thing we can do is grab our best friend, the large pry bar, and put it right between the lower mount for the spindle here, and maneuver the lower control arm out from its home. There we go. Perfect. All right, the next thing we need to do is located on about midway point on the strut here is remove this nut and the sway bar link here. And it is a 18mm. We're going to go ahead and remove that, because if you don't, you won't have enough action. You won't have enough action to bring it toward you in order to remove the CV axle. So as we turn that 18mm, we can see that the whole fitting is actually turning. You see that little thing right there? So we need like a channel locks or something to grab onto that while we're taking this off. There we go. Alright, now we can remove this sway bar link, and you can just kind of let it hang out right there. So now we have plenty of movement, so that's good. Alright, so what we're going to do now is take a pry bar, or sometimes you can get away with a big screwdriver, and pry our CV axle out of the transmission here. And we want to do our best to pry that straight back. There's a little clip you're fighting in there. So once you've broken that loose, which did take a considerable amount of force, there's a little clip inside the spline, the inner spline, on the transmission side. That's what it looks like, kind of separated, and you might notice that it is dripping transmission fluid. This is totally normal, so get a pan ready. Okay, so we can take this nut right here, and you see this axle nut. What I want you to do with this bad boy is toss it right in the trash and buy another one. Link down below in the description. So we can go ahead and maneuver our CV axle out. Just like that. Catch that seal. And there we go, old CV axle out. All right, so here is our new nut. I got this from General Motors. I'll go ahead and leave a part number or a link down below in the description. And this is the old washer that went over here, but we're gonna go ahead and throw that away and get a new one. Always use a washer. Here's the GM part number for you. If you want to go ahead and pause and Google that, I'll also try to leave it down below because these are genuine GM parts. We can move that aside and also compare our old CV axle to our new one. It's the same, so we're good. And we can put this washer on here by pushing it down like this, making sure that's fully seated, so we're ready to go on that. And we can put this on later. And you can also, if you're curious, look down in there. It's really tough to see on camera. You can kind of see it. There's a little ream down there, and that's what that little clip sits in. That's what you're fighting against when you're trying to remove it. So now this can go back in the car. Now we can replace our CV axle here, making sure that it is going on the splines properly. You want to make sure that you're not binding it. There we go. Okay, so here's a little tip for you. Make sure the splines are lined up, and then you can kind of use the CV axle to ram itself home, and you want to make sure that it is fully seated so it's no longer leaking transmission fluid. So now we can put the CV axle back into the hub here, and that might take some maneuvering. There we go. Some jiggling around really helps this job go. Next thing we need to do is put this lower control arm back into its home. There we go. More jiggling seems to really be the trick here. If this bolt won't go back into its home, try pulling up and down the lower control arm. You might be surprised that you need to pull down, not up. Or maybe you need to pull up on your application. Depends. All right. Now we can grab our 15mm socket and wrench here to tighten this up. Torque to spec. All right, and then we can put the wheel speed sensor, little plastic body clips here back on the lower control arm. Make sure that doesn't go anywhere. There we go. All right, the next thing we can do is put the sway bar link back on. Fairly straightforward here. Next thing we're going to do is replace our CV axle nut here. Now this replacement unit is a 36mm, so it's most likely an updated standard here. Now the tightening operation of this is you want to tighten it to 111 foot-pounds for your first pass. And you can see why I have the screwdriver up here. So we're going to insert it here and put tension on it like this. Alternatively, what you could do is get a pry bar, a big pry bar, and hold it like this between the studs if there's enough room. That's also another way to do it. It doesn't really look like that. Like a big pry bar, and do it that way, not a screwdriver. This way you need a pry bar. Which also works great if there's if you don't have two people, which I don't tonight. So screwdriver against the brake rotor will work. So the first torque spec is 111 foot-pounds. We want to tighten it to that. And we need to do this in 2 stages. So there's our first stage, 111 foot-pounds. The next one we need to do is actually loosen it 45 degrees. So now that we've loosened it 45 degrees, what we can do is now ramp it up to 185 foot-pounds on our 1/2-inch drive torque wrench. So that's how you do a 2-stager. And there you go. Don't forget to remove your screwdriver. The next thing we can do is replace our wheel speed dispenser here. Goes in just like that. Jiggle that in on down in there. Replace our 10mm bolt here. And there we go. I don't really have a torque spec for you, just snug is good. It's a little 10mm bolt, don't snap the head off of it. So that is how to replace this driver's side CV axle in a 2014 first generation Chevrolet Volt. This is something that you definitely need a pry bar and some patience to do. This isn't something maybe that somebody with little patience would be able to do. This is a little bit more of an intermediary skill level. I'd put it kind of in the lower middle as far as difficulty goes. It's still doable if you have some patience, and you can get the car decently high off the ground with the jack and jack stands. And again, you have a really nice pry bar, was a big help. All applicable links that I used today are down below in the description. Thank you so very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.